Hello and welcome to this very exciting episode of the MediaTech Podcast. We are actually down at the Houston campus and we have screenwriting teacher Valerie Edwards. How's it going?
Great.
Awesome. So I want to talk to you a little bit about your background, and also it's pretty interesting that a school as technical as MediaTech is actually teaching screenwriting, and from you and Lee, a couple of really experienced screenwriters on board as well. So I want to kind of dig into that.
Okay.
But first, let's talk a little bit about your background. So how did you originally get into writing and screenwriting?
Originally, I was a journalism major in undergrad, so my focus was news, and I interned and worked at Dateline and different news stations, and realized that format was way too rigid for my personality, and started seeking out more creative jobs, and fell into film. Kind of, but I would work odd jobs on different film sets. And so I was a script supervisor for a year. I just started seeking out different gigs, as many as I could find. And I went to a journalism conference, and there I got a chance to meet Felicia D. Henderson. She was the first Black female showrunner. And so at that time, she was running a show called Soul Food, the series on Showtime.
Cool.
And so I basically attacked her. Not really, but she did a panel discussion, and I was able to approach her, and I told her I would love to have her read my writing. I would love to work with her. I just want to know about that world. And so she was afraid, but she said okay. And she told me to send her some of my samples, which I did. And 2 months after that, she called me and said, to come out to LA, and that I would shadow her on Soul Food, the series, which was shot.
So exciting.
Yeah, because I was 20, so I was like, okay. And the show was shot in Toronto, which was really cool. And yeah, I was there for the entire first season.
Oh my gosh. So I want to talk a little bit about that first meeting. I mean, that must have been super gutsy. Like, what went through your head of that decision to approach her, and also, especially when you're sending her your work, was that scary?
Yeah, I mean, at first I didn't know that she was going to request any work. I just was like, I need to meet you. I am so impressed with who you are, and for some reason we happen to be in the same room together, and I'm going to take full advantage of that.
That is so cool.
So,
I think a lot of people can learn from that kind of tenacity. Honestly, like a lot of, especially when there's sort of an apprehensiveness when you meet like a hero like that. So that's really cool that you were able to break that barrier.
And especially now, because there's like a disconnect, I think, with people because of social media.
Yeah.
And back then, there wasn't social media really. I mean, we had MySpace. So I was just, I took advantage of it because that was my shot. And I was just so impressed with the show and what she had already accomplished. And so why not? I didn't have anything to lose, so yeah.
That's really cool. So what did you do immediately following that when you get to Toronto? What were you doing on that show?
So I became a writer's intern. So it's hilarious because the writer's assistant on the show at that time was Burris, the showrunner for Blackish.
Oh, cool. Wow.
Yeah.
That's
so
really cool.
There were a lot of people that now have gone on to do great things. But yeah, so I was a writer's intern. She had to give me a job because the network was like, okay, so what's her role? But technically I was shadowing everything she did. So I got a chance to watch the entire script development from start to finish. I also got to sit in on meetings and understand how what was the structure of the show and how the network was involved in just the entire clusterfuck that is, entertainment.
So what was that experience like? I mean, you were, I guess, immediately thrown to the wolves, I guess, huh?
Literally. I mean, I wouldn't say it was intimidating. I think that because of age, like I said, I was 20. So I wasn't exactly intimidated. I just thought like this was a wonderful opportunity, and begged myself to try to take advantage of it and meet and network with a lot of people.
Yeah,
So
that must have been a really exciting time. So
yeah, it was cool living abroad. and now being an adult, like it was like, my first year out of school. And so, that was the cool part. And I was living with a stripper and her 2 bulldogs in the greatest part of Toronto, though.
Yeah.
Her parents didn't know she was stripping. And that wasn't my problem. And and you were working, like we were literally on set for like 15-hour days.
Oh my gosh.
It was, but for me, it was an incredible experience.
So what was your day-to-day like at that early stage?
So I would get up in time to meet her at the production office for meetings and such, and sit in on that. And mostly I would be around the writers. So I got a chance to actually participate in the process and start pitching ideas, which was really cool. That's what I was excited about. I got a chance to write scenes eventually. And then I would be on set, it's long days on set, and just watch how those scenes suddenly came to life.
Man, that must have been so exciting, seeing your scenes come to life, especially that young, too. So where'd you go in your career after that?
So after that, I went back to LA, and I had this, this new ego, this newfound confidence. And I thought, due to my connections now, because I'd met a lot of, execs and things, that I was going to land a writing position on any show that I was interested in. And I quickly learned that that's not the case. And so there began my life in reality television, because that was an easier gig to get into. And so I worked on Trading Spaces and different pilots and stuff like that, until I realized that I wanted to really focus more on, I guess, the skills that I developed on Soul Food, focus more on the writing. Felicia actually was the first person that said to me, "You are a writer. That's it. Not that you're not a producer and these other things, but you need to start with the craft." Yeah. And so then I went back to New York, and I started attending NYU.
Nice.
For grad school. Yeah.
That's awesome. So you mentioned reality TV. I want to talk a little bit about that. So
okay.
I think that there's a disconnect. A lot of people don't understand how a screenwriter kind of interacts with that world. So how did that kind of fit in for you, and what was that role, in regards to reality?
Okay. Well, I had gotten my feet wet even before Soul Food, because I was here in Houston, and I worked for the Deborah Duncan show. It's now, Great Day in Houston, I think.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so she used to have a show called the Deborah Duncan Show, and so I got a chance to work on that show. And then I also worked, like I said, Trading Spaces, and then I shot a pilot out here for Texas Justice. So I got to produce on that show. So I kind of, I saw the producer's hand. I saw the writing that was involved in those types of shows. And so later on, after NYU, I would soon learn that those are the types of shows where you're constantly working. In film, you have a gig, and whether you're writing or producing, once that film has been produced, your role is over. Whereas in reality television, it's, and I use this loosely, but it's the gift that keeps on giving. Like, you constantly have a job to go to every day in between maybe working on a film. Mm-hmm.
So how did you apply your talents as a writer to, Trading Spaces, for example? That's a really interesting thing. So, I don't know. Like I said, there's probably a disconnect with a lot of people that, what were your actual responsibilities and what were you actually doing?
Essentially, the role of a writer on a reality television is to open up the truth. That's sort of how I'm going to say it. Mm-hmm. So you take a grain of truth. Say it's a court TV show. There's always a grain of truth, but your job is to produce that truth and make it entertaining. So bring the drama. It's like searching. You're searching for what can viewers grasp onto, and then what can you grow out of that, kind of like a story. Mm-hmm. And then that's what you sink into, and then you just sort of exploit it.
Man, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So from there you went to NYU, and then did you go immediately back to work after that, or?
I started working for producers Bob Balaban and Amy Robinson, and they produced the film Game 6, okay, along with others. So I started off as a reader, and then started working on set again in New York, which was cool. I started doing plays, because at NYU you had to be able to write for everything. Mm-hmm. So that was my first opportunity of doing playwriting,
Cool.
and I was pretty good at that, and I won a couple of awards and started making a little name for myself.
That's awesome.
And I guess the most important thing that I did there was I wrote a screenplay about Assata Shakur, a biopic. And so that, I think, is what, like, the community out there really remembers of me, and that later would get me a lot of opportunities.
That's awesome.
Including focus from the FBI, but that's not what we're here to discuss. Yeah, it was a situation.
I definitely want to talk about that after the podcast. So you said playwriting. I want to talk about that a little bit. That must have been an interesting, kind of pivot.
Yeah, I mean, it's immediate. It's I don't know. It's like being nude in front of a whole group of people. Like, everything is on stage. Everything, you're bearing yourself in front of a room full of people, and you can't go back and edit it. You can't change it, and but it's also more gratifying.
Why do you say that?
There's immediate response.
Yeah.
Normally writers are in a little room in the dark, sad and anxious, toiling away with all these people in their head, and you can lose sight of reality, and you hand over your work to someone else who runs off with it, so you're like a surrogate, and it becomes this other thing, and whether or not you're invited to the screening, that's is to be discussed. But with playwriting, you are the boss, and you're there, and you get to watch this thing affect people, in present time.
That
and it's
sounds
really
so
powerful.
Intimidating. Man, that must be scary.
I think it's I compare it to, if you were on stage doing stand-up.
Yeah.
You get immediate feedback. And there's something really gratifying about that you don't, that you usually don't get from writing in a little room by yourself.
Man, that does sound interesting. So from there, Chicago, right?
Yeah. So then I got a job in Chicago. Basically, I was producing inspirational programming for an inspirational station called WJYS. And my role was to go out and recruit preachers for different shows that we were going to develop. So something like they were like the Joel Osteens before Joel Osteen. So I'm hunting them down in different churches, and I'm in my stilettos in the freezing winter, and I'm at revivals, and I'm at all these things, and I'm trying to convince these preachers to then exploit themselves in their congregation and come on our station, and I would mold programming around their message.
Must be such a unique experience.
Unique that's a very kind way of saying it. It was exhausting, and it was interesting, and it was hilarious, and I didn't know that preachers had the type of egos that they have. Oh yeah. Like I saw more chinchillas, and it was like like people sitting in thrones with chinchillas, and So it was interesting. It was a lot of work. You worked 7 days a week.
Oh man.
And then did I mention it was freezing?
Yes.
So I was getting impaled in the back with icicles as I went out to track this guy down or track this person down. But,
oh my gosh! Did you have to go to the services?
Yeah, I had to go to all the services. They kind of hazed you, the preachers, to see how serious you were. Because
hazed you? Huh?
Yeah, because it was like if I from that first meeting of me telling them what I was about in the station, and they all knew what the station was because it was the only inspirational station in Chicago. And so, they would invite me to all the revivals, and I would have to show up, and they would invite me to all sorts of events, and it was a circus. It was interesting. I got through it though. And then, the fun part was then if I convinced them to come on board, which I was able to do. Mm-hmm. I learned and that's where I pretty much learned the art of the pitch and salesmanship and the importance of that. Then I was able to bring them into my world, into the studio, and try to figure out how to make their program entertaining, which was then my rules. Okay, now how are we going to, how is this going to translate to the masses.
Sounds like you were doing a job that could easily be 4 or 5 people.
It was 4 or 5 people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I learned quickly how important multitasking was, which, yeah.
That's cool. And from there back to LA, right?
Right. So then I got a call about a show on TNT. It was a pilot on TNT that a friend of mine who also went to NYU with me was working on. He called me up, he remembered the screenplay that I wrote. He was like, I want you to come out to LA and I want you to write on a show called One Love. It had already been picked up, I believe, for 10 episodes, and it was starring Sherman Hemsley. So that led to me moving back to LA.
Man, you bounced all over. So
Yeah,
how long into your career was that?
How long ago was that?
No, I mean, how far into your career, like after Toronto?
Yeah, so that was like maybe 10 years,
Gotcha.
Almost like 9 or 10 years.
Man, so that's like a place every 2 or 3 years. That must have been tough.
Not really. I mean, you really get tired of places.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, I was like single and I didn't have any attachments. So I didn't have my dog yet. I didn't have a 5-year-old. So it wasn't, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So you worked on Judge Judy in LA, right? Among other things.
Yeah. So the TNT show, that only had 1 season. And then I started writing again. Someone hired me to write for a film. So I was doing that, and it was all about incarceration. Mm-hmm. A 6-time felon, this whole thing. And I was becoming very dark, really, really, really dark. And so I get a call from a friend who worked on Texas Justice. So remember, I produced, like 9 years ago, produced the pilot of it, and they were now working on Judge Judy, and they were just like, would you even consider it? And I needed something lighter. At least I thought it would be lighter, and I said, sure. Everybody knows who Judge Judy is. This should be really cool.
And was it?
It was interesting. It was very, 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 very interesting. I mean, honestly, the spotlight should be on the behind the scenes of the show rather than the litigants. Yeah.
So tell me about that process. Like, what was your day-to-day on that?
Let me see, what can I say? So, I mean, it's a tight-knit group. I would get in. The show is divided into teams. Okay, and so you have your senior producer, then your associate producer, and they compete to find the best cases.
And literally, or
yeah,
wow,
and it's very cutthroat.
Oh my gosh,
like Mexican cartel cutthroat.
Oh my gosh,
really, like serious. And they compete over the cases, and then you have a tape week. So you have tape week every other week. And then you stay, long days throwing cases up on the board and being rejected and destroyed over and over. And you're also, during that time, you're producing these cases. So, for instance, from start to finish, if your producer comes in and they have a stack of cases that they somehow smuggled away from the last producer. And then they divvy out to each associate producer which ones we're going to work on. And then from there, then we're left with the charge of actually creating a case out of this. So just like the ads say, they're real cases in small claims. Mm-hmm. But what you're going to see on television is a little different from what's on paper.
That's really interesting.
Mm-hmm. And so then I would take my my claim sheet, and this is a real claim in small claims court.
And just to clarify, though, the litigants are like reaching out to the show to be
no,
so how does
absolutely
that work?
not.
So how does that work?
So you have researchers that go into the courts, and they pull claims. Anyone can do it. It's public knowledge. So you can go into the courts, pull the claim sheets, and then you bring them back to the show. And
then when you found one, like, how do you persuade the litigants to do it on Judge Judy?
And see, that's the trick. So I'm looking at my claim. I see who's the plaintiff, who's the defendant. Of course, I'm going to talk to the plaintiff first. And so that's when you develop a 2-week courtship. Sometimes it's months long. It's a really seedy affair. You become their best friend, their therapist, their counselor, their PO, whatever you need to be. You become that. And soon enough, you can convince them to do anything.
Man, and then do you have to convince the defendants as well?
Absolutely.
So you have to convince
Everyone
both
has to
parties.
be on board, yeah. And you got to find some witnesses, and you have to.
Oh my gosh.
And a lot of these people, they're missing teeth and fugitives, and it's interesting. It's if you can work on that show and actually succeed, you can talk to anyone. You can convince anyone of anything, which is the skill that you develop.
I guess the misconception that the show is trying to perpetuate is that there's no behind the scenes like that. Like you would never know that all that work goes into getting those cases on TV,
Yeah, it is. I mean, the litigants do not apply for the show.
See, I didn't even know
So it's
that.
like if I called you out of the blue, told you that I'm a producer on the show, I got a chance to take a look at your case. I think you have, a huge chance of winning on the show, but you have to waive your rights, for going to court, And if I tell you I can convince, the other party to come on as well, and you stand the chance at winning blasé amount of money, will you do it? Most people say yes. Life is pretty bleak for a lot of these people. So this sounds incredible. You get to come out to LA, you get to go to Disneyland, you get to do, this is like a vacation. Some people go rogue. It's my job to go out in the middle of the night and hunt you down. This causes a lot of problems, especially when your litigants, are armed. So with that being, and then you have to, but the worst part is when you end the relationship, because after the show, I'm never going to talk to you again. I'm getting like that was probably a burner phone that I talked to.
Can I ask how that goes? I mean, you don't have to get too far into it, but no.
It's probably the worst breakup you could ever have.
And that's your job, doing that over and over.
All the time, and you're doing it, multiple cases if you're good, and I was pretty good at it, and you've got a lot of people on the hook. I mean, it's like producing a film because you have different stages of development.
Yeah.
So you're just now, starting to catfish this person, and then you're, because also when they, you're going to be different from what they expect as well. Like I know everything about you because I have cyber stalked you into understanding exactly what kind of human I'm dealing with.
Yeah.
Because I have to research you so that I can really get in there.
Oh my gosh.
And some people are not that great at it. Yeah.
That's got to take a toll after a while, I can imagine.
It darkens your soul. And then you have to make the decision, do you want to maintain your integrity? Do you want to hold on to some sense of self, or do you continue in this process for 20 years and then you look at your senior producer and you say, absolutely not, because I see what this does. And so, yeah.
That is so interesting. I've always wondered all
or
that on
you write
that
a pilot about it.
So I'm guessing that's what you did, huh?
Uh-huh.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So what was your next move after that?
Okay, so that was, so then I left the show because the film that I was writing before about incarceration and the 6-time felon was getting picked up.
Oh, cool.
And so that, the producer behind that, Alon Aranya, who's like a big-time television producer right now, he was getting that picked up. And then I quit the show thinking, okay, let's go. This is about to be great. And it died. Mm-hmm. And so shortly after that, I started executive producing a couple of different docs, which was actually really cool. And then I wrote and produced a short. It was a suicide musical.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it was called A Minute Forever. And it was actually really cool because I had never done like a musical. Mm-hmm. And so in shooting and directing that, it kind of whet my appetite again for film and creativity, away from daytime television, away from that sort of corruption. And it actually did really well in the film festival circuit. Sweet. And so after that, I executive produced more documentaries, and then I had a kid. Mm-hmm. And then after I was tired of doing baby talk, a friend of mine approached me while my child was 8 months and basically said, and this was also someone that I went to school with, and he basically said, look, I want to produce a doc on Dick Gregory, the comedian activist.
Oh, nice.
And he was like, but I need you to produce it. I want you to help me co-write it, blah, blah, blah. I said yes immediately just because I was so excited for adult conversation and just to find out what was happening in the world and to stop breastfeeding. And I took that on, and we are just now about to settle on a deal, which we're really excited about.
Congratulations.
Mind you, the child is 5 now. But yeah, that was pretty much my entry into being a real producer writer and understanding the importance of owning your IP, owning everything that you put out there. That was a very expensive education in that.
Oh, man.
So, yeah.
So that I did want to segue into that. On the phone the other night, you said that one of your biggest things, especially when you're teaching your students, is to learn how to produce and be, all involved in their projects, not just from a writing perspective. Can you talk a little bit about that and why you feel so strongly about that?
Well, as you've noticed, I've talked a lot about starts and stops.
Yeah.
And in a lot of those projects that I was working on earlier in my career, I was not the owner of the script. I was hired on to write the script. I was hired on to serve in this and that position. And there's a real power in entrepreneurship, as you well know. There's a real power in owning your IP. And the payoff is incredible. And so one thing I try to stress to my students is the fact that when they leave my class, they will not only be writers, but they will be producer writers. They will be filmmakers. They will own their material, and they will make their material. So that's something that's really important to me. That's something that becomes really important to the students.
And it seems like thus far in your career, it seems about even production versus writing. Is that about accurate?
Yeah, I mean, the producing part has really soared in the last few years. So I've taken on several other projects while still completing the Dick Gregory film. Mm-hmm. But I still, at heart, I love to write. It's like a craft. It's like going into, your little station and doing pottery or something. It's just, it calms me. And a lot of times you still have to use your writer's head for everything.
Yeah.
So
that's super interesting. So I also want to talk a little bit about, MediaTech being an intensely technical school, it's a great way to hit the ground running in kind of a media career, whether you want to be an audio producer or a filmmaker. So for someone that's, let's say they want to be a DP or something more like, it's still artistic, but more of a technical job,
Yeah.
Why do you think that it's so important for those students to learn the craft of screenwriting and get into that a little bit as well?
Well, if you think about it, screenwriting is the foundation for media, okay? Storytelling is the foundation for media. It's where everything starts. So even if you're interested in becoming a DP or a gaffer, whatever it is, it's spawned from that story. Mm-hmm. And, your knowledge of that craft can only make you a better DP. You will understand story more so that your skills will reflect that.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
That's a great answer.
Thank you.
So to wrap up, is there anything you're working on now you want to talk about, or what's in the future for you?
Well, currently we have an animated feature coming out on Amazon that's due during the weekend of Thanksgiving, right after Thanksgiving.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, so that's called The Immortal Warrior,
okay,
which I'm really proud of. Like I said, the one and only Dick Gregory should be out in 2020.
Nice.
And it'll have a lot of big names that you know about. We talked to Chris Rock, Nick Cannon, Kevin Hart. All of these guys are on board for that, Dave Chappelle. So that's been a really cool project. My partner and I are also shooting a digital series in the spring called Permanent Sunset.
Okay.
So that should be cool, and I am finally getting the chance to develop a pilot called Gaslight.
Wow.
So it's a lot of things,
You're
happening.
busy.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for doing this. And if anybody wants to learn more about you or follow you, how can they reach out, or any social media or anything like that?
Yeah, my handle is It Is Val.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
On
We'll put that in
Instagram.
the description.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for listening or watching this. If you want to learn more about MediaTech, again, we're in the Houston campus, but they also have a campus up in Dallas. They schedule free tours if you want to pursue a career in filmmaking, audio, music production. Up in Dallas, they're also doing makeup, acting, mobile app development, animation, and more. Feel free to check out mediatech.edu and schedule a free tour. I promise, whatever campus you go to, you will be blown away by the facilities here. And thank you, Valerie, so much for appearing on the podcast. And we'll see you guys next week with another episode. Thank you so much.